Good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading to you from this book about the French Revolution, Terror and Triumph. This month of December, I've been taking topic requests from people. This one was requested quite a while ago, so let's just dive right in. So it's not just like I'm randomly doing the French Revolution. This was requested by someone during a live stream. Here we go. The rising tide of revolution. Imagine that you are a French peasant living in the 1700s. You are poor, hungry, and angry. While you and your family suffer, the nobility are eating well and spending lots of money. You have to pay taxes to support the government, but the nobility does not. This is what life was like before the French Revolution. In France, the king had all the power. There were no limits to what he could do. The people of France did not always like the king's decisions, but they could not vote. They had no say in who their rulers were or how their country was run. The peasant class had no voice in its government, but strong leaders soon began to emerge. These people were willing to fight for change. They wanted a say in government and equality for all men. This fight became a violent struggle that lasted 10 years. It would not only change the government, but French society as a whole. This struggle was called the French Revolution. Strict social classes. During the 18th century, French society was divided into 3 estates, or classes. The first estate was the clergy, and the second estate was the nobility. These first 2 estates made up about 3% of the population. The remaining 97% of the population was poor peasants. They were known as the third estate. Nobles and clergy had many privileges. They owned land, but did not pay land taxes. They were also well educated. Peasants had no privileges. They paid taxes to the king and their lords. They also paid dues to the church. Peasants were not educated. Most could not read or write. Peasants were allowed to farm on land owned by the wealthy classes, but they did not have much control over their own work. They were forbidden to kill animals that ate their crops. The wealthy landowners wanted the animals alive so they could hunt them. Peasants could not stop landowners from hunting near or even on their crops. Landowners sometimes damaged peasants' crops or fences while hunting. If that happened, the landowners were not required to repair the damage or help the peasants in any way. Peasants had no power. The monarchy. A young king. On May 10th, 1774, King Louis XV died of smallpox. His son and oldest grandson had already died. Thus the throne was passed to his younger grandson, Louis XVI. Louis XVI never wanted to rule France, but there was no escaping his fate. France now had a new young king. Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette, lived in the Palace of Versailles. Louis inherited a country in trouble. France was nearly bankrupt after losing the 7 Years' War. Its resources were strained. The population had grown from 20 million to 28 million during the 18th century. The people of France were poor and hungry. When Louis XVI took the crown, he was only 19 years old. He did not have a strong, decisive personality. He was better known for being clumsy, awkward, and weak. Still, the people of France embraced him and Marie Antoinette as their new king and queen, and hoped for changes that would improve their lives. Instead, Louis made things worse by mismanaging the country's finances and making poor decisions. The peasants became angry. The streets of France filled with riots, lootings, and lynchings. Madame Deficit. Soon the people of France were not happy with their new king and queen. They were starving and suffering while the young queen, Marie Antoinette, was buying all the latest fashions and wearing fancy hairstyles. She spent her time dancing and attending the opera. She gambled with the country's money. The people of France felt that she was not helping them or their country. Marie Antoinette's extravagant lifestyle earned her the nickname Madame Deficit. The French people found another reason to dislike Marie Antoinette. For the first 8 years of her marriage, she did not have any children. As queen, it was her duty to produce an heir. This heir would take the throne after King Louis XVI. Later, between 1778 and 1786, Marie Antoinette did have 2 sons and 2 daughters. As her family grew, she became a less extravagant queen. She devoted more of her time to her children. However, the people of France had already turned against Marie Antoinette. Their lives had not improved. They had lost confidence in the monarchy. It was too late for the Queen of France to win back the affections of her people. The revolution begins. A radical move. By 1789, King Louis XVI knew he had to address France's problems. He called a meeting of the Estates General. This political body had not met in 175 years. It represented France according to social class. The first estate represented the clergy, the second estate represented the nobility, the third estate represented the peasants. Each estate was allowed 1 vote on issues. The Estates General met for several months to discuss the problems in France. The third estate felt unfairly represented. It represented most of the French population, yet they were allowed only 1 vote. On June 17, 1789, the Third Estate made a radical move. They defected or broke free from the Estates General. The Third Estate now called itself the National Assembly. The National Assembly wanted the nobles and clergy to join them. The king quickly realized he could not control this new organization. On June 27th, he gave in. He ordered the nobles and clergy to join the National Assembly. The people of France had won, and this victory was only the beginning. In July, the National Assembly began writing a new constitution for their country. There's Robespierre. He's going to come into play later. He was the head of the National Assembly. Storming the Bastille. King Louis XVI was willing to recognize the National Assembly. However, that did not mean he wanted to lose power to this new group. Encouraged by Marie Antoinette, he sent royal troops to keep the people of France under control. This decision made the people uneasy. They worried they were about to be attacked. Next, Louis made another unpopular decision. He dismissed the country's well-liked Director General of Finances, Jacques Necker. Now the people were angry. They wanted to fight back. On July 14th, 1789, about 20,000 people stormed the Bastille. The Bastille was an ancient prison on the east side of Paris. To the people of France, it was a symbol of the monarchy's abuse of power. The people also knew they could find weapons there. At the Bastille, the mob demanded weapons. The guards refused, and chaos broke out. The mob tore apart the building brick by brick and killed guards and the Bastille's governor, the Marquis de Launay. Afterward, they cut off his head, stuck it on a spike, and paraded it through the streets. It was a violent start to the French Revolution. The Great Fear. All over France, peasants were hungry and angry. The storming of the Bastille inspired more riots in other towns during the summer of 1789. Many of the riots were violent. Mobs forced city officials out of their positions, and new town governments were formed. Regular citizens created their own military forces. Rumors fueled the people's anger and fear. King Louis XVI appeared to be accepting of the revolution, but everyone expected him to fight back. Some said the king was plotting to have their crops burned and their villages destroyed. Others said the queen wanted to starve them. The people began to falsely report sightings of the king's men around their towns. When this happened, a whole town could be thrown into complete chaos. Many peasants responded to these rumors with action. They burned landowners' homes and feudal records that symbolized the taxes they had paid. Sometimes they looted and murdered. France was out of control. This period was later known as the Great Fear. The people had a lot to fear, as their streets had turned violent and chaotic, and their king could not be trusted. A new form of government. A new charter. On August 26, 1789, the National Assembly adopted a new charter for France. This list of articles was called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. It symbolized a radical change for France. The country's old system of social classes was based on the idea of inequality. Peasants were not allowed the same rights and privileges as the clergy and nobility. The Declaration called all men of France free and equal. It said the government should work for the benefit of its people. The Declaration was a major step toward democracy in France. However, it put Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette in a dangerous spot. There is no place for royalty in a democracy. In October, an angry mob gathered in Paris. Change was not coming quickly enough for the people of France, and they blamed the king and queen. The mob began to march to Versailles. The people carried brooms, pitchforks, and knives to use as weapons. The mob forced the royal family out of the palace and brought them back to Paris, where they could be watched. The family had become prisoners of the people. The Legislative Assembly. In Paris, the royal family lived in Tuileries Palace. They had well-furnished rooms and servants. They still behaved and lived like royalty, but they were watched and guarded closely. Everyone knew King Louis XVI was against the revolution. He wanted to uphold the monarchy. By September 1791, Louis had no choice but to swear his loyalty to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. Although his power was restored, he knew things would never be the same. The monarchy was lost. Later that month, the National Assembly met to make it official. The country became a constitutional or limited monarchy. The king, who had always ruled alone, would now share his power with a newly elected Legislative Assembly. This assembly would replace the National Assembly. On August 27, 1791, Austria and Prussia threatened France with military action. The two countries wanted to end the French Revolution. This threat was called the Declaration of Pillnitz. It asked European rulers to help the King of France. They wanted Louis restored to power. This threat would result in a war. The revolution ends. France at war. In September 1792, the National Convention was formed. It replaced France's Legislative Assembly. Its members were elected by vote. The National Convention wanted to abolish or get rid of the monarchy and put into effect a new constitution for France. King Louis XVI had hoped Austria might help rescue his monarchy, but the Legislative Assembly wanted to declare war on Austria. The country had threatened France. Austria insisted that France not harm Louis and give him back his power. Louis was no longer truly in charge of France. On April 20th, 1792, he had to sign a decree declaring war on Austria. The war was not going well for France. On July 25th, 1792, the commander of the Austrian and Prussian armies issued a warning to the struggling country. This warning was called the Brunswick Manifesto. It said that France should restore the monarchy and that no harm should come to the royal family. If France did not obey, Austria and Prussia would attack and destroy Paris. Despite the threat, the very next day, Maximilien Robespierre called for Louis's removal from the throne. Death to the monarchy. Not long after Robespierre called for the removal of King Louis XVI from the throne, the royal family was taken to the Temple prison. Life at the prison was like nothing they had ever known. The rooms were cramped, airless, and dirty. Still, they were allowed large meals and money for clothing and furniture. Marie Antoinette hoped the Austrian and Prussian armies would defeat Paris and rescue the monarchy. But that was not to be. On September 22nd, 1792, the National Convention declared France was no longer a monarchy. It was now a republic. On December 11th, 1792, Louis was put on trial for treason. In January, France's king was found guilty. Louis was executed by a new device called a guillotine. The guillotine was designed to kill criminals swiftly and efficiently. It used a heavy blade that dropped down fast to slice off its victim's head. It was used in public so everyone could witness the punishment of criminals. In October 1793, Marie Antoinette was also charged with treason. The court had no evidence against her, but she was found guilty. A large crowd gathered for her execution. As Marie Antoinette's head fell to the ground, the crowd cheered. The monarchy in France was dead. Reign of Terror. Maximilien Robespierre had now gained control over France. He ruled by terrorizing those who were against the revolution. France became a frightening place. Spies were everywhere. Anyone could be considered an enemy. Minor infractions were considered suspicious. Some people were turned in for using the formal phrases monsieur or madame. In the New Republic, they were supposed to call each other citizen. They also had to watch how they spoke about the revolution. They might be turned in if they did not sound passionate and supportive enough. In June 1794, the law of the Second Prairial was passed. It sped up the legal system. Enemies of the revolution now moved through the courts more quickly. That meant more executions. Between September 1793 and July 1794, over 17,000 people were put to death by guillotine. This period became known as the Reign of Terror. Toward the end of Robespierre's reign, moderates began to take control of the country. Robespierre himself was executed on July 28, 1794. France entered a new period called the Thermidorian Reaction. Napoleon's rule. On October 26, 1795, military leader Napoleon Bonaparte was named commander-in-chief of all armies in France. Military successes made Napoleon a hero in France. He defended France against enemies of the revolution. He helped to restore order in the country. However, he used his status to his own advantage. He was part of a military coup d'etat. A coup d'etat is a plan to overthrow the government. The plan worked. Napoleon became France's new leader in November 1799. The next month, the French Revolution was officially over. Napoleon was named first consul. He reformed the country's educational, financial, and legal systems. He helped make France a leader in Europe. But Napoleon was also a dictator. He ruled with total power. He did not allow anyone to challenge his decisions. Napoleon wanted to conquer the entire world for France. However, in 1814, Napoleon was removed from power after several military defeats. King Louis XVI's younger brother, King Louis XVIII, came to France to claim the throne. After years of revolution, France's monarchy was restored in 1815. And that is the end of our story tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night. Good night.